Hi, so a quick summary of the pros and cons of running API mocks or virtual service inside builds and pipelines. In the first scenario, we've got your tests and the microservice under test or system under test and those API mocks or virtual services running inside your CI/CD build agent, runner, or slave. In this case, we've got two of those running in parallel. Another way of doing this is running your tests and your microservice under test inside the CI/CD agent, runner, or slave, and then keeping your virtual services separately. In this example, a Kubernetes test environment. And another way of doing this is running your tests in the agent, runner, slave, which hit or exercise a QA environment, in this example, instance of the system under test, which then connects to a service virtualization environment or mocking environment where the mocks are running. Okay? So what are the pros and cons of these approaches? Well, the pros of running inside CI/CD, which is this, everything's isolated inside the build agent, is that you get more reliant builds because those builds do not rely on any external components or infrastructure. So there's less things to break. Then you've also got a known state of those API mocks or virtual services because you're using ephemeral per test run API mock instances with test prime state instead of long running API mock instances with undefined state. What does that mean? Well, if you spin up this guy as part of this build and tear it down, you know which state it starts in and which state it was going to be used for those tests. Whereas in here, you don't know if this was running for a while or not and who's been using it for what. So it's less predictable, the state of those API mocks, which might impact the stability of your test runs. Okay? Then it's easier to set up and maintain those builds by running that API mocking or service virtualization tool from tools like Maven, Gradle before the test and tearing it down after the test. So in here, you just use whatever you use to start up those tests. You can use that same tool to start up your API mocks. Okay? Whereas in here, you suddenly need to configure Kubernetes, deploy it somewhere, manage that deployment infrastructure, service definitions, etc. So basically, there's less work here. Okay? And then it's easier to run multiple builds in parallel. So if you're running against your test against a shared environment that is connecting to a shared service virtualization environment, if you wanted to double the amount of tests that are being run against the same system under test, well, those tests might interfere with each other and they need to be written in a certain way that you don't use the same usernames, for example, because the parallel test runs might be stepping on each other's toes. So if you are able to run the system under test or microservice under test inside your CI/CD pipeline or build, then since this is totally isolated, you can just run many of these builds in parallel. So now that we've covered the advantages of running inside CI/CD, what are the disadvantages? Well, first of all, to be able to run those API mocks of virtual services inside CI/CD system, the system under test needs to be capable of running inside CI/CD. So in here, our microservice under test is capable of being run inside the build agent, build runner, build slave, GitHub Actions, whatever you use. But in some legacy environments, you're going to still have to run the system under test that you're testing inside a shared environment. And it's not prepared to be run inside the agent or runner or slave for CI/CD. So in that case, you have not much choice. You have to run your API mocks and virtual services outside of CI/CD. Okay. Another one, people need to be trained on how to use mocks inside CI/CD. So if you're coming from this world and you move to this world, It's a slight mind shift where your engineers, testers, and developers need to understand that you can actually, when you're going towards microservices, the new microservice-like architectures, and you're running your microservices inside CI/CD, you can actually run pretty much all of your dependencies there as well if you choose to, like databases, test containers, and API mocks as well. So there's a bit of training required there. In order to be able to run that API mocking or service virtualization tool inside CI/CD, you need a low footprint tool that's designed to be run per test build. For example, open source WireMock, Motorbang on commercial traffic patterns. So imagine this tool needs to have a low footprint, let's say 200 megabytes of RAM, 100 megabytes of disk, and not gigabytes of RAM and gigabytes of disk usage, because these agents are typically not capable of running those types of configurations. You need to keep in mind if these are actually performance tests you're running here, and these Cucumber tests are actually not Cucumber functional tests, but they're, let's say, JMeter performance tests. You need to make sure that these mocks are going to be performing well as well, so the hardware resources allocated to this CI/CD agent runner or slave will have the necessary resources. Another minor issue might be that debugging those builds or pipelines with no access to a running API mock means that the observability might be impacted. So basically, if you're running like this, you can actually access the user interface of these mocks and see what's going on. Whereas in here, since they're being torn down after the build, and when the build, let's say, failed, you need to be able to look at the logs of this tool and make sure that there's enough in the logs to help you understand why the test has failed. And fortunately, tools like we've mentioned already do that pretty well, like Motorbang, WireMock, or Traffic Pattern. And another minor issue, especially with very small build agents, which is not often the case, so it's just a minor issue. You need additional 200 megabytes of RAM or 100 megabytes of RAM and 100 or 200 megabytes of disk to run these API mocks here, right? And it's not a big issue for most people, but it might, you need to keep that in mind. Okay. So yeah, so those are. This is a quick summary of the pros and cons of running the API mocks or virtual services inside your CI/CD builds and pipelines. And yeah, if you've got any comments, please leave them below. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.